Hello, friend. I'm Brother Larry Montgomery. I am the founding pastor of Towering Oaks Church. We are located at 1159 Highway 62 West, just outside the city limits of Berryville, Arkansas. Our campus consists of a little over 20 acres. We have a 17,000 square foot building, with the main floor being the sanctuary that can seat approximately 500 people. The bottom walkout level is a fellowship hall, a kitchen, and Sunday school rooms. We have an open-sided gazebo with restrooms and a mini kitchen for outside events, and a 30 by 48 maintenance building. The last building we built is a 120-foot square building, with the middle part being a gym and a state-of-the-art kitchen. It has two-story classrooms on each side of the gym. I want to share with you how Towering Oaks Church and now the addition of Oaks Christian Academy came to be. It has been an exciting journey. We have seen the mighty hand of an awesome God that can take meager people and use us to accomplish His purpose. December the 27th, 1992, my wife Phyllis and I met with a group of people, 35, 40, maybe 50 people. I preached, we had church, and without realizing it, a new church was being formed. This group had no idea what we were getting ready to experience from the hand of God. But if we were going to be a church, we needed a place to meet. At that time, Hickory Ridge Plaza had a section of their building that was vacant. One of our men contacted the owner, and the owner said, "You can use it, but it'll only be on a temporary basis," because they had something else planned for the building. At that time, we had nothing that you would need to have church. We didn't have a songbook, somebody said, and that is true. In fact, we made copies of the words of songs. Somebody loaned us a piano. One of the men built a pulpit. We put together enough money and purchased, I think it was 100 metal folding chairs, and we were underway. I would open the service, we'd sing, Brother Larry Birchfield would take prayer requests and have prayer. In fact, he continued that as long as he was able to do that. But we were having church, and almost immediately our crowds began to increase. Larry became my right-hand man in heading this church. Larry was a great pastor's friend. A pastor's friend is someone that you can confide in, that you can talk about things and discuss things and never have to worry about it being told to other people. There was no better pastor's friend than Brother Larry Birchfield. But we needed a more permanent place. At this time, the old Methodist church building on South Springfield was vacant. There was apartments that was in part of the building, but the old sanctuary was used for storage. One of our men approached the owners, and they agreed to let us use it. That old building was dirty. We spray painted the walls just to clean it up, and it had striped carpet. It looked, I called it candy striped carpet, but it was dirty, and we thought about replacing it, decided we didn't want to spend the money on it, so we just kind of cleaned it up and went ahead and used it that way. But it was a place that we could be and not have to be in a hurry to leave. That old building served us well. But along the line, Brother Larry and I would discuss what we needed to do next, and we both agreed that we need to move forward in seeking a permanent place for our church. I felt we need to be west of Berryville, and I wanted to be outside the city limits of town. So we began looking for land to the west. Larry and I made many trips from Walmart to the Outpost looking for a place to come to purchase, and we just kept coming up empty. It seemed there was nothing that we could find west of town. One day while Larry was at work, I was driving back and forth by myself, and I was looking at each property as I went by. As I approached the area where our church is now, I looked at some other property owners, and I said to myself, on the west is the Park Hill property, and over there to the east is the Marshall property, but it appears there's some land in between these two property owners. So I went straight to the courthouse, went in and searched, and I found that Dorothy Weeks owned 21.217 acres in between those two property owners. That evening when Larry came in from work, I shared with him what I'd found. Well, I called Mrs. Weeks, and I asked if she would be interested in selling that property. She said, call my daughter. She's handling these things for me. So I did. I called her, and guess what she said? I was going to the newspaper next week to advertise this property for sale. What a miracle. God had opened up this land to us before the general public knew it was for sale. That is the miraculous God that we serve. So I said, let us come and talk to you before you advertise that property. So we set a time, and Brother Larry and I, along with some other men of our church, went and we sat down and we talked with Mrs. Weeks and her daughter. The big question was, how much do you want for your land? $83,000. That was $3,911 per acre. Of course, we didn't have $83,000. That was a pretty hefty sum at that time for that property. But then the daughter said something of interest. Mom wants to finance the land so she can have the interest to pay on, to live on. Well, how about that? It's quite interesting. How much would you like to have down on your property? $5,000. Guess how much money we had in our account? Just a little over $5,000. Not only had God opened the land to us, He had put the financing in place for us. We closed on that property March the 10th, 1993. That happened just about 2.5 months since we had that first service on December the 27th, 1992. At that point, we didn't have a songbook. Now, 2.5 months later, we had land. God was directing in this work. Well, we spent time out there driving around, looking that property over, trying to determine where to build and make some plans on what that we needed to do. One day, I was by myself out there just driving around, looking and thinking, and I was on the south side of the property, and I looked through the weeds and the grass, and I saw what looked like a cemetery stone. Caught my attention. I didn't know what was happening here, so I got out and I went back and looked at that. And sure enough, there was a stone, taller stone, and two shorter stones. Well, that was of interest. I wanted to know what was the story on this cemetery on the back of our property. I went to Nelson's Funeral Chapel, and I went in and I asked about that, and they said they didn't know anything about a cemetery back there. Apparently, no one had been buried there in over 100 years, I think. But anyway, they knew nothing about it. One day I was working with a topography map, and there on the map I found it, Pleasant Valley Cemetery. I searched that out further, and we determined that Pleasant Valley Cemetery was actually on 3 different property owners. The fence lines come right through the cemetery. Well, we looked that all over and we decided it needed to be cleaned up. And so we went in and we cleaned up that cemetery that was on our part of the land. So we've kept that mowed ever since and cleaned up for several years now. Recently, our pastor, Brother Dave McMillan, and several men of the church, along with the property owner on the south side, built a new pipe fence and put up an entry gate with the words Pleasant Valley over it. Now it looks very nice back in that area. July the 4th, 1993, we had our first service on the property in the trees by the cemetery, 78 in attendance. Well, we kept looking, and we finally picked a spot where we wanted to build. Found a place where we could build a 2-story that would be a walkout entrance on both levels. A fellow in our church, and I think it was Brother Larry, contacted an excavator that he knew, and he agreed to come over and excavate the land for us to make preparations to build. Another miracle. When he had finished the work, he loaded his equipment, said no charge, and he left. God had used this man to do the work with no charge. He was showing his hand. God was showing his hand in the work that we were doing. Well, we began working to build a retaining wall, then a concrete slab. We were building it 50 by 100, 5,000 feet on each level. Men of the church worked. Brother Larry Birchfield oversaw and guided us in the work. We finished the concrete work. We put up the walls above for the first level, and then we put a subfloor on top of that and waterproofed it. Everything was paid for to this point, with the exception of the note for the land. We determined that if we had $50,000, we could get the basement to the point where we could begin having services on our own property. I went to Tom Wood at First National Bank in Green Forest, and I told Tom what we were doing and that we need to borrow $50,000. Tom already knew what we were doing. Everybody in the community knew what that we were doing. But I told Tom we didn't want a mortgage. We just wanted to sign a note. We did not want the expense of a mortgage and all the stuff that you have to do with mortgages, but we just wanted to sign a note. So the big question he asked was, well, who's going to sign this note? And of course I said, I will, and there are several people, several men of our church that will sign that note. He agreed. Consequently, all that loan cost us was the interest. Well, we finished the basement and we moved in. We were on our own property. That was a great time for us. Attendance continued to increase. There was a sweet spirit among us. Services were uplifting and encouraging. People could come and feel at home. Several came to our church that had been hurt in a church somewhere and had dropped out, but they came and they became great workers and supporters of this church. You see, all the time from the very beginning, we've never had big I's or little U's. We welcomed new people. We worked together as a group, and we had the family of God attitude. God's blessings was upon this work. Well, we paid that $50,000 note off in a relatively short time. However, we were still making payments to Mrs. Weeks. We began making plans to build the upper level. Of course, it was going to take money to get that all finished. But I had an idea that I shared with Brother Larry, and I said, let's have a Make It Happen Sunday. We would set aside the first Sunday of each month for the next year. We would call it Make It Happen Sunday. We would ask people, give extra, as God told the church at Corinth, give as God hath prospered you. Every first Sunday, the offering was greater than the other Sundays. People had got involved with this idea of Make It Happen Sunday. But we had a goal, we had a determination, and we could see it happening, and we knew we could see it completed. And the reason we knew that the hand of God was on this work. Consequently, as the people in Nehemiah 4 and 6, the people had a mind to work. There's something I want to share with you about that. I saw people blessed. Those who took the Make It Happen Sunday seriously were blessed in various ways. There was peace in the hearts of people. There was contentment in being part of something that God was doing in this community. There was happiness. There was a sense of belonging. There were people who saw God bless them financially so they could give even more. I learned a lot during that time. I learned that being involved is totally different from being a spectator. I saw personal growth in our people. They grew spiritually. The Holy Spirit was working in and through them. They grew in physical ways. They were being there, a part of all the services. They were helping with any event, whether it be a dinner, a work day, a work night, whatever. They were physically involved in the work of the church. And they were emotionally involved. You see, when you're involved, your church becomes a part of you, and that was happening in the people of our church. I can't tell you all that God did in the lives of others that were involved in Make It Happen Sunday, but I can tell you what He done for us. Our business increased, and it continued to do so. Some of us who stretched ourselves now have children and grandchildren that are involved in the work here. I tell you, you stretch yourself and you'll see what God can do. Well, our attendance continued to grow. More people joined in the work. April the 10th, 1994, just 2 years or just over 2 years from the time we began, we had our first baby Sunday here in our church. That was something I had implemented in a church that I had pastored prior to this. And at that baby Sunday, we had an attendance of 151 people. A year later, on Baby Sunday, March the 26th, 1965, we had 188 people attend for Baby Sunday. You always have greater crowds on that day as people come to see their little grandchild or whatever, and they get excited about the Baby Sunday. Well, people were coming to see what was going on, and it helped spread the word that there was a great work happening here in this place. Well, we were still in the basement, and we were anxious to get in the new sanctuary. Nobody in the church was getting paid, not me, not Larry, none of the others that was working. Nearly everything that was coming in was going to the building and the land payments. We began framing the upper level. We did have some people that need to be paid. We paid framers and electricians and roofers. Brother David Keith, a pastor friend of mine from out north, who was also a plumber, came in and he done all the work of the plumbing of our new building, no charge. My brother-in-law, Bubby McDonald, a painter that came from Springdale, came over and he finished the doors and the trim. He donated his labor. People joined together to see the building completed. There was men, there were women, there were kids that worked. We used saws and hammers and we painted and we cleaned. And a lot of nights people were here working. But there was none that spent any more time and put any more work and effort than Brother Larry Birchfield. He was here nights. He was here Saturdays. You see, you'll never love and appreciate something until you're instrumental in getting it done, and these people were. Well, we finished that sanctuary. We installed the pews. We purchased a baby grand piano. We were set up and we were ready now to have church in our new sanctuary. We moved in probably May, June, July, I'm not sure the exact month of 1996. All this time, we had continued making payments to Mrs. Weeks. We wanted to pay her off, but we were honoring her wishes so she could have the interest to live on. But one day I called her daughter and I said, what would be the possibility of us paying off the note that we owe your mom? And she said, yes, Mom could use some extra money right now. God had worked again, and so we paid that note off. When we finished with our building and paying off of this note, we were debt-free. Less than 4 years earlier, we didn't have a songbook. Now we had 21 acres, a 10,000 square foot building, and we were debt-free. I was determined that we were not going to strap our church with a big debt. The wise man Solomon said, the borrower is servant to the lender, and I didn't want to see our church be a servant to a lender. But I had no idea what God was going to do, and I had no idea how fast he would do it. He had provided in ways that we had never dreamed of. I've had preachers ask me, how did you do that? I've had young preachers call and they won't try to do the same thing, start a church and build a building. But all I could say is the hand of God has been on this work from the very beginning, and my words to them were, don't start anything till you know that God is in it. Well, he has blessed in great ways. Things were going good. You might ask the question, we had hardships. Absolutely, we've had hardships. Sunday, October the 19th, 1998, we had our morning service and our evening service, and it just been something over 2 years since we had moved into that new building. About 1:25 a.m., our phone rang. I answered it, and somebody said, Larry, your church is on fire. I jumped in my clothes and I headed out to our building. When I rounded the corner into the parking lot, fire was coming out all of the windows. It was too late to stop it. It burned completely. The only thing we had left was metal and ashes. All that we had worked for and all that we had put our heart into was now gone. People were heartbroken. Tears were shed. It was a devastating time. And I suppose it would have been a good time to give up. But I knew that we couldn't give up. God didn't bring us this far to give up. The following Sunday, October the 25th, 1998, we had church in our parking lot. There was an attendance of 256 people showed up in that parking lot. After service, we circled the ashes of our church and we prayed for the Lord's guidance. It was a large circle because that was a big space. KY3 TV was there and they reported on the fire in their newscast. They interviewed me and they asked one question, they asked several questions, but the one I really remember was they asked, "What are you going to do now?" I just said, "We're going to build back, and we'll build back bigger." I was convinced that's what we needed to do. With no place to have church, what were we going to do? It would take a large space to accommodate us. There just wasn't anything in Berryville large enough that we could rent to handle us. At that time, Tyson's was using the old Walmart building as a box warehouse. Terry Houghton ran on to Mike Armstrong, who was one of the managers of Tyson's, and hit him, and he asked him, "What about us having services in that building?" Miraculously, he agreed to allow us to use a portion of that building to have services. In fact, he sent his crew in, they moved boxes back, and they made a hole by the front door of that building big enough for us to meet in. God had done it again. The first Sunday after the fire, we were on our parking lot. The second Sunday, we were in the old Walmart building with space large enough to accommodate us. So we went in and set up things, purchased chairs again, the things we needed, and we set everything up. And during that time, Tyson's never asked us to take down our chairs, move them out, and then set them up the next Sunday. They allowed us to set that up and leave it set up. We were there nearly 3 years, and we never had to move anything that whole time. Our first service was there November the 1st, 1998. People showed up from everywhere. We had 263 people come and join us in that old Walmart building. Again, we're back in the metal chairs, but no one complained. And I can tell you that new box smell was not the most pleasant thing, but nobody complained. God had made that available to us. Well, during that time, Larry and I were back with architects, builders, and whoever that we needed to be back with, and we thought the architects would never get their work done. We were anxious to get on the property, and they were moving what we thought was very slowly. April 4th, 1999, Easter Sunday, we decided to have service back on our parking lot. When we got there that Sunday morning, there was 297 people showed up on that parking lot. And I'll never forget what I preached. I had heard of a pastor or a preacher that preached and used a title of a sermon, "It's Friday, but Sunday's coming." And I borrowed that title and I put together a sermon, "It's Friday, but Sunday's coming." Well, you see, that coincided with where that we were at. It was a devastating time, but we knew a brighter day was coming. It's Sunday, but Sunday's coming. Well, jumping ahead, nearly 3 years later, the new building was finally completed. Again, debt-free. God had provided everything we needed. He had provided in ways that I had not seen coming. September the 16th, 2001, we had the first service in this new sanctuary. Again, a large attendance. 375 people had come to be a part of that first service. What a great time it was to be back in our own sanctuary and back on our property. Well, during that time, we had built some other buildings that I had mentioned earlier. We'd built the shop building, and it was debt-free, and we'd built the gazebo, and it was debt-free. And somewhere along the line, we decided to build a gym with classrooms. When we were planning it, I had in my mind a Christian school. I wanted to see a school here at some point in time, and so we laid that building out in such a way that it could be used for a school. That's the reason we put the gym in the middle of it, and we built 2-story classrooms on either side of that gym. Again, when that gym was completed, with the exception of the kitchen, we were debt-free. Not long ago, a first-class kitchen was built or completed there in that gym. Again, debt-free. The God of miracles had been with us all the way. Here's another miracle. The only money that we ever borrowed and the interest paid was for the land and for that $50,000 that we borrowed to get into the original basement. Through the years, we have spent several $100,000, yet the total interest that has been paid by this church is less than $30,000. That shows you what that God can do with a willing people. It's hard to find another church that began with nothing, was not backed by another church or another organization, and end up with facilities like we have and have everything paid for when completed. Those of us who have been here from the beginning on down to the newer ones that are here now are able to have nice facilities because of a miracle working God. And now the dream that I had and we had when we built the gym has become a reality. I knew when we built it, I would not be the one to open a Christian school. It was not on me to do that. God just put it on my heart to prepare the way. Now God has put it on the heart of our pastor, Brother Dave McMillan, to open Oaks Christian Academy. Brother Dave has put his heart and his soul into getting it done. No one knows how much time and effort that he has put in to making it a reality. But there's no doubt that God put it on his heart, that God has used him in a great way to begin this school. Our first year opened with just over 60 students. It looks like our second year is going to open with something over 80 students. I continue to believe that God will increase this work and will have a great impact on our community. I will go to my grave amazed at what God has done and what I believe he will continue to do here at Towering Oaks Church and Oaks Christian Academy. Jeremiah 33:3, God said to Jeremiah, "Call upon me, and I will answer thee, and show thee great and mighty things which thou knowest not." As the song says, what a mighty God we serve. We have seen that to be true, with God providing the facilities, but more importantly, many lives being changed and continue to be changed here at Towering Oaks Church and Oaks Christian Academy. We say thank you to a faithful God.